Welcome to a game that I feel I am qualified to pontificate about because part of my bachelor's degree is in writing. This is What Remains of Edith Finch. It is a story-based game. If you're not comfortable with very heavy themes of death and loss, this might not be the video for you. And if you're not okay with narrative games, this might also not be the game for you. Interestingly, I'm very familiar with the Puget Sound ferry lines because I lived on an island recently. But that said, let's actually start the game before we get into that, I suppose.
A lot of this isn't going to make sense to you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just going to start at the beginning, with the house. I lived here until I was 11, but I wasn't allowed inside half the rooms.
The first sort of indication we have of this game's major theme is the idea of storytelling. The entire game is framed as a narrative being told by our protagonist, Edith Finch Jr., I suppose, Edith Finch II, to someone else, though we don't know who that someone else is yet.
Inside the mailbox were bills from 7 years ago, marked urgent, open immediately.
Well, I guess that's not gonna happen. And before anyone worries that I have just spoiled them on the fact that our character is named Edith Finch Jr., in the pause menu, you can see here, that's us. And way back here is Edie, who is also an Edith Finch. So it's not really spoilers.
I hadn't been back since my brother Lewis's funeral.
Another big theme of the game is introduced pretty much right off the bat of death.
In her will, my mother left me a key, but didn't tell me what it unlocked.
Looks like it might be
Maybe
a house
she thought
key.
I'd know. Or she thought that the mystery would be enough to bring me back.
The Finches.
No one had driven this way in a long time, but I saw a few hoof prints.
I do have to wonder how long it's been, because this road is really messed up for, you know, what it is. Interesting fact about living in the Washington area, deer are very acclimated to human presence to the point
The truth
where...
is, even after I inherited the house, I never thought I'd come back to it.
To the point where when I've been on walks on certain like university campuses and stuff, I've almost
But now I
walked
had
directly
questions about
into
my
them.
family that only the house knew the answers to.
And
The house was exactly like I remembered it, the way I'd been dreaming about it.
what a house it is! I don't think that's up to code.
I asked Edie once about the dragon in the pond. She said it had killed her husband.
Huh. Those are missing posters in the water there as well. This might not be clear on recording, but that says Milton Finch.
As a child, the house made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't put into words. Now, as a 17-year-old, I knew exactly what those words were. I was afraid of the house.
So they haven't been in the house since they were 11. Now they're 17. That road has really gotten pretty messed up over the course of 6 years. But I guess that's what would happen. And on a separate note, I'd be a little bit scared of this house too, if only because of the tower.
I hoped the key might unlock the front door. It didn't. Looking in, I felt like the house itself had been waiting for me.
I wonder who Gary is, and why his potting mix is so good. Messed up swing up there. I always wondered when playing this game at these garbage cans, and I know this is going to seem like a little bit of a silly aside, but these garbage cans would imply that there's like a municipal garbage collection service in the area. But the issue with that is like, how would a garbage truck even get up here? Because these are like the kind of cans that have big forks that grab them and pick them up. And I know that this is the least interesting fucking thing on the planet I'm talking about right now. But it bothers me because I don't know, I have fucking nothing better to do.
Crawling through the doggy door used to be a lot easier when I was 11.
Plunder box. Store your shit. Perfect for stacking. Single can of soda, or perhaps beer. Woodworking shop. Bicycles. And a full car. Wow.
For the first time in years, I felt like I was home. But instead of a family, there were just memories of one.
Edith, Dawn, Edie, and Lewis. And a funeral flyer for Lewis.
Like how after Lewis started working at the cannery, we all got sick of eating salmon. Except our cat, Molly.
I wonder if this is a functional recipe for apple pie. Yeah, no, that As far as I can tell, that is a perfectly functional recipe for apple pie. Sorry if you couldn't see it on the
Or
recording.
how only one restaurant would deliver to our house, so we had Chinese a lot.
Orcas Island. As I said, I lived on an island in the Puget Sound region recently, and it was difficult living because no delivery places delivered, and it was a 30-minute ferry ride to go anywhere for food. So you either learned to fend for yourself, or you had family members fend for you.
The table was still a wreck from the night we left. It was like a bomb had gone off, killing everyone but sparing the furniture.
An intriguing thing about this game is that these narrative trigger points are actually fluid, because in a different playthrough, I approached this table from the other side and it displayed the text in different places and guided my mouse to different places. So, for those of you out there who are interested in quirks of game design,
My mom was the only one of us who could imagine Great-Grandma Edie living in a nursing home. Nothing in the house looked abnormal. There was just too much of it, like a smile with too many teeth.
would you notice if someone's smile had too many teeth? Or are they talking about people who, like, smile too wide so it becomes disconcerting? A lot of family photos. The Pacific Pantry, Cosmic Cuisine. The Hunter's Roast. A good table. That's a lot of cookbooks. Metamorphosis. Pastoralia?
Mom always told me to stay out of the basement, so I wasn't too surprised when the key didn't fit. Great-Grandpa Sven built a music box for Barbara, along with the rest of the house.
Barbara Finch. A movie star of some variety.
A lot of things got left behind in the whirlwind of that last night.
Huh.
Edie told me once that every Finch who ever lived is buried somewhere in the library.
Keep that in mind as we play through this game. The importance of the library to the Finch family, and by extension, the importance of stories to the Finch family. Especially with stuff like, the dragon out front and...
After Milton disappeared, Mom sealed up all the bedrooms. Then Edie retaliated and drilled peepholes.
all of them except that one, apparently. We'll get back to that in a moment.
Molly always seemed like a girl I could imagine being friends with, if she hadn't died in 1947.
10 years old.
Whenever people ask me about my family, the first thing they always want to know about is Barbara. Edie's father, Odin, built the original house. Barbara was a child star for 2 years, until America grew out of it.
44 to 1960. So she was 16 when she died.
Mom must have locked the third floor stairs on the night we left.
Sven and Edie.
The last time I was in Edith Sr.'s room, I was 10 and she was painting my portrait.
In 1917 to 2010. That would make her... don't look at that again. That would make her 83, I believe. Yeah? No, 93. Damn. And,
My Grandpa Sam spent 7 years sharing a room with his dead brother, Calvin.
another not so alive 10-year-old, or 11-year-old in this case.
As a kid, I just assumed every house had peepholes and sealed rooms you weren't allowed inside of.
Mount Rainier poster. Mount Rainier, very pretty view. Huh.
I spent a lot of time playing in Great Uncle Walter's room. I think my mom sometimes regretted not sealing it up.
Sunken house on the wall. And a light that I'm not quite sure where is coming from. I don't think it's the window. Oh, it is the window. It's just a really weird angle.
Lewis told me there were secret passages, but I never believed him. Turns out, my mom was really good at keeping secrets.
How do you spend your childhood in this
room? Now it was time to find out what my mom had been afraid of.
And not notice a padlocked book?
From the paintings on the wall, it was clear my brother Milton had been here before me.
Milton. It would appear that Milton is interested in the arts.
Reading this, maybe it sounds like I had a plan, but I had no idea what was behind that door. Just like I had no idea where all this was gonna lead.
This is Molly's room.
I grew up looking at Molly's room through the peephole. Molly's gerbil had a tiny bedroom with its own even tinier gerbil cage.
Whoops. Sorry for interrupting that line of dialogue. I believe it says being inside of it was like stepping behind an oil painting.
Being inside for the first time? I felt like I'd stepped behind a painting.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that line was still going to play. I will admit I have played through this part a couple of times at this point, just because of recording issues.
I got the sense Edie had spent a lot of time here, before my mom sealed the doors.
Daddy was eaten by a dragon, and Molly was in an underwater castle.
December 13th, 1947. Dear Diary, I'll be gone soon, but I wanted to tell somebody about what's gonna happen. It started when Mom sent me to bed without dinner. I woke up and I was starving, so I looked around for something to eat. The gerbil food was dry, but I didn't mind it.
I don't know if gerbils are allowed to have carrots.
Mom, can I come out now?
Sweetheart, it's late. Go to sleep.
My Halloween candy was all gone. I thought about eating Christopher, but I held back.
No, don't look back up there.
I kept eating and eating.
That's probably not great for you.
I ate a lot of things that night.
The more astute of you out there might know that holly berries are poisonous. I don't believe they're poisonous enough to kill a kid,
Then I heard
though.
chirping outside my window. It was a barn swallow going back to her nest. I reached out for her. And suddenly, I was a cat. I tried to be quiet, but the bird was really scared. I jumped and I almost got her.
The jumping ability of cats continually amazes me. Have I just bugged out the game?
I could tell she was
Okay,
getting
no.
really tired. Now I was up in the big tree. I promised Dad I wouldn't climb it anymore. All I cared about was eating that mama bird. I gobbled her up. And suddenly, I was an owl. First, all I heard was the wind. Then I heard little teeth nibbling in the grass. Rabbits. I imagined his face looking up and seeing mine through my talons.
I'm not an expert on
I swallowed him
owls,
up, and I didn't chew one bit.
but I don't
Flew
think...
off to find something bigger.
I know they swallow things whole, and that's why owls have pellets, and they cough up all the hair and bones and stuff they can't digest. I don't think they can
mama
swallow whole rabbits. If they can, and if any of you out there know they can, keep it to yourself.
She was almost too big to carry. I started choking, but I couldn't stop eating. And suddenly, I was a shark. I rolled off the cliff and into the ocean. Now, I was hungrier than ever. I wanted fat, juicy seals.
Oh,
I tore off her flipper, and it tasted really good.
I like seals. Game, why are you making me do this?
I grabbed on tight. But I was so hungry, I jumped out of the water. When I opened my eyes, everything had changed. Now I was a monster, and I smelled people everywhere.
I'd like to talk to the Foley artist who designed all this squelching. That must have been a fun afternoon.
I was big, but I moved real quiet. wanted to stop, but also I didn't.
That man clipped a bit.
After the last passenger, I was still hungry. And across the water, I smelled something new. Something I had to have, so I swam towards it. I slithered onto the sand, and the good smell went into an old pipe.
Never follow good smells into old pipes, children. That's how you get Pennywise. That's how you get clowned.
I got closer and closer.
Uh-oh. I don't think I like this.
All of my stomach started growling. And suddenly, I was me again. I held my breath for a long time, but I couldn't hear anything. I think it's waiting for me to fall asleep. But it's not going to wait much longer. It needs to feed, and we both know I will be delicious.
I'm not sure if I believed all of that, but I'm sure Edie would have.
So one of the first uses of a story, or in one of the most primary uses of a story, is to explain something that you don't understand in a way that makes sense to you. People used fables of the gods and of spirits to explain natural phenomena that they couldn't. And whatever was actually happening to Molly that night, if it was a monster attack or something else entirely, she probably wouldn't have understood what was happening. And by telling a story, you're able to put words to it. Maybe that is how it happened. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, by telling the story about what happened and putting it into terms that you understand and are familiar with, terms like, deep sea monster animals and owls and sharks and things that you're familiar with, it makes it easier to understand and easier to process.
This will be obvious later, but my mom never told me any of these stories. Edie would have, but Mom didn't like bringing up the past. Though, when we adopted a stray kitten, she was the one who named it Molly.
And so we see the difference between Edith Finch Sr. and our player character's mom. The player character's mom seals up all the rooms, doesn't bring up the past, and deals with her grief by compartmentalizing it down and sealing away the rooms, essentially, because a person's living space is a large facet of who they are, and by sealing that away, you're essentially sealing the person away, in a sense. And so by doing that, it's a way of dealing with grief. Edie's way of dealing with grief, or dealing with the situation at all, is instead to embrace and celebrate and retell the stories of those people. Well, maybe not retell, or at least not to the protagonist.
I spent a lot of time in Great Grandma Edie's room.
Great Grandma Edie had a lot of birds. Hang on. Rob, Lurpy, Purply, Perpy, Zerpy, Derpy. Unloaded texture. Bob, who is a snake, and Burpy.
We got along, and it was a good place to hide from my mom. When Edie told people Sven was killed by a dragon, she could also have said he was building a dragon-shaped slide that collapsed. She could have, but she didn't.
Another function of stories to make the mundane more interesting. Take something like a senseless, tragic accident and turn it into a heroic, beautiful final moment.
One summer, they evacuated the island, but Edie refused to go. For a few weeks, she was a celebrity. Edie gave a big interview about a mole man living under the Finch house. My mom was furious. I hadn't thought of myself as Edith Jr. for a long, long time. Louis died a week before we left, but Edie had already started to memorialize him. Edie knit me a new pair of gloves every year, just in time to replace the old ones.
Those are the gloves we're wearing now, I believe.
Her room was like a museum.
Odin.
For 500 years, the Finches have been famous throughout Norway for their fortune and misfortune. Odin Finch buries the latest victims of the family curse, his wife Ingeborg and their newborn son, Johan. On January 7th, 1937, he set sail with his family and his house, hoping to leave the curse behind. But 40-foot waves off the coast of Washington send the house and Odin to the bottom of the sea. Odin's daughter Edie, with husband Sven and baby Molly, step ashore on their new home, Orcas Island. Odin Finch is the first to be buried in the new family cemetery. His daughter Edie is already dreaming of a new Finch house. Whatever's wrong with this family, it goes back a long ways.
Another function of stories is to give our life structure and narrative. Human beings have a tendency to believe that things will keep going the way they are if things are good, and if things are bad, that things will have a sudden upturn. Senseless deaths and pains and tragedies are assigned narrative by saying that there's a family curse or something tormenting a family, and by sailing to a new world, perhaps you can leave that curse behind and open up a new chapter in life. It's just as likely that nothing happens at all, or that things get worse or better. It's entirely random, frankly. But by assigning things to a narrative, it helps people make sense of their life and be comfortable in living their life and interconnecting events. You think of life as something with a beginning, a middle, and eventually an end, an inherent structure. of storytelling. And even way back at the beginning, the Finches are very concerned with stories in the form of books and death.
Even in her 90s. Sometimes Edie seemed a lot younger than my mother.
This is the worst part of the game, because this is a bathroom with shag carpeting, and thinking
The only
about
trace
that...
Grandpa Sam's first wife, Kay, left on the house was the pink bathroom.
Yeah, thinking about that makes my skin crawl.
It was a pretty big trace. There's a secret in this bathroom. It's in the last place you would look. It isn't in the cupboard. It's hidden in this book.
Photo darkroom. I always enjoyed working in the photo darkroom.
Sven gave Sam an old camera he'd refurbished. He never put it down.
As I was saying, I enjoyed working in the photo darkroom of my of my high school. Using the enlargers was always interesting, and the developing process was always a lot of fun for me. I'm a little bit sad that it's less common for photos to be developed in darkrooms now, because I think there is something very charming about it, and I very much would have liked to have worked in a darkroom. But oh well. More of Milton Finch's drawings. I wonder how you're supposed to get over there. Maybe there was a bridge at some point. Yeah, that seems like it would be the case.
I knew Grandpa Sam had a twin. And that he never talked about him. I guess my grandpa didn't like history any more than my mom did.
How I Want to Remember My Brother by Sam Finch. The thing I remember is that when he made up his mind, that was it. My brother said he'd die before he ate another mushroom, and he did. At Barbara's funeral, we swore we'd never be afraid again, and he wasn't. I think Calvin always wanted to fly.
Sam! Calvin! Dinner's ready! Coming!
But that day, he finally made up his mind to do it. I told him going around was impossible. Maybe if I hadn't said that.
Calvin! I'm not gonna tell you again!
Maybe if the wind hadn't picked up. And maybe he'd still be here. But I doubt it. I think he'd already made up his mind. That's what I want to remember about my brother. the day he made up his mind to fly. And he did.
Calvin's story felt strangely familiar. When I was younger, I remember trying to do the exact same thing.
Another function of stories is to, well, compartmentalize grief, deal with it, and to eulogize someone. Take the parts of them that you like and that you admire and that you love, and remember those instead of everything else.
After the funeral, Edie roped off Calvin's half of the room. Mom said Grandpa Sam enlisted at 18 and never set foot in the room again.
Certainly a interesting little house that the Finches have constructed. A little bit insane, I would say.
The passages were a pretty tight fit. They'd obviously been built for smaller hands and bellies.
Before I head out there, I'm going to head in here.
Growing up, I always thought of Barbara as a child star. I never thought about how hard it must have been for her afterwards.
It's never easy having so many expectations placed on you when you're young, especially if those expectations are built around your youthfulness, which obviously won't last forever.
Of all the stories people wrote about Barbara's death, I'm surprised Edie saved this one.
Old Jack here with another ghastly tale inspired by America's most unfortunate family. I'm calling it The Surprise Ending of Barbara Finch. As a child star, Barbara was famous for her scream.
I know another
Now it's
child
a
star
shame
that
she
does
was
that
all
pose.
washed up, a has-been. But in a lucky break, she'd been asked to perform her signature scream at a local convention for monster movie fans. It was just the boost her career needed. Unfortunately, her scream hadn't aged well.
Getting better. I think you just need the right motivation.
Her biggest fan and current boyfriend, Rick, was about to demonstrate when...
Now that was a great scream.
It was Barbara's father, Sven. He'd slipped into a table saw and had to be rushed to the emergency room. So Barbara got stuck babysitting her youngest brother, Walter. Her convention comeback was cancelled.
Okay, I'm hearing frustration, but I'm not hearing terror. What if I tried...
A gang of hoodlums in Halloween masks have been terrorizing Orcas Island tonight. Police are urging residents to...
That came from the basement.
You're right! Also, I loved your delivery on that. Why is your basement door locked?
Because my dad likes making puzzles and secret passages. There's a key hidden in the music box. The secret is to keep winding and winding until finally the key pops out.
Thanks, babe. I'll be back in a sec.
20 minutes later, Rick hadn't returned. So Barbara went to look for him, right on cue. She reached for the music box. And as she wound the key, she listened for Rick, but the house was silent. She found Rick's crutch and imagined the worst.
I've never been hit with a crutch before, but I feel like that would be quite nasty.
The gang's leader is the infamous Hookman killer, Dr. Carl Hamill, who impaled and then ate his family 10 years ago tonight.
The table saw where what's-his-face tripped onto it, which, gross to think about. I don't like thinking about that, but
The old fridge
these things
rustled
happen.
and grew still.
Oh dear!
Oh.
Rick?
Barb, relax. I was just trying to scare you to help you find your scream.
Well, I'm not scared, Rick. I'm furious.
Then act furious. All I'm getting from you now is that you're hurt and confused and you're...
She threw him out, but she kept a little something to remember him by.
Barb, have you seen my other crutch?
And she was still holding it when she fell asleep watching the late picture show. Hours later...
Barbara! Walter, what's going on up there? Ah! Okay, I'm coming up, but if this is a trick, you're dead, Walter.
What kind of family gives out apples on Halloween?
Walter, are you there?
Walter appears to like trains.
Walter had vanished, but his bedside radio was still on.
Orcas Island police describe the man as 6 feet tall, with a steel hook for a hand. Residents are urged to lock all doors and windows and notify the police of any suspicious activity.
Oh,
Barbara turned, saw the hookman, and was speechless. He was quite smashing. And who he was, he couldn't get enough of Barbara.
Okay, Barbara, there's gotta be another way out of here.
That night, she played her part beautifully. Molly's door hadn't been opened in years. The hinges groaned. He wasn't moving, but she sensed the story might not be over yet. The hookman had vanished. She listened for his breathing, but all she heard was... At the door, she heard whispering. It was coming from inside the house.
that's the schlockiest horror trope I can think of.
Oh dear.
surprise her. For Barbara, it was a dream come true. Then she saw what kind of monsters they were, and she realized what was about to happen. She was going to be famous. And with her final breath, Barbara Finch gave the performance of her life. I wasn't there myself, but I hear Barbara was magnificent. Poor girl. She had a taste for stardom. But unfortunately, so did her fans. Of course, the police blamed it all on poor Rick, who disappeared the same night. And little Walter? Hiding under his bed the whole time. He took it all pretty hard, but that's another story. As for Barbara, tucked inside the music box is all they ever found of her. Her ear. Now that's what I call a real eerie tale.
Edie told me all Barbara wanted was to be remembered, as absurd as that comic was. Maybe what Edie saw was a happy ending.
Stories are also helpful in giving closure about incidents or people. Maybe nothing happened that night. Maybe Barbara and her boyfriend decided to run away together, and the hook-handed man and the ear in the music box were all fabrications on part of the comic. Maybe something did happen to her and she just vanished without a trace, and there was no way to explain it other than to blame it on the boyfriend. But by having that story and by telling it, it gives a finality to an otherwise unanswered question. And I think people need that sort of finality. And I'm sure that's something that will come up again eventually. It's hard to accept the idea that life is random, that sometimes people just vanish and we'll never know what happened. People like their lives to have a cohesive beginning, middle, and an end. And in a way, that comic book gave Barbara a cohesive end to her life. And that, I think, is very important and one of the very...
It's funny. All those times I played with the music box and never found the basement key.
One of the more important uses of stories is the
I
gaining
guess now
of
I know why
closure.
Mom didn't like me playing with the music box.
As we can see here, the railing is broken. So who knows what really happened? At least with that comic book, there's some semblance of sense to it all. Basement appears to still be under construction. At least to a degree. Sven's workshop and the
Mom said the basement was off limits. Unless I
famed
wanted
table
another
saw.
tetanus shot.
I suppose it makes sense why we weren't allowed down here, considering it is just a woodworking shop, and that's not safe for children.
I saw Edie sneak down to the basement once, carrying packages. I thought maybe she was hiding presents. It turned out she was hiding a lot more than that. I remember asking Mom once about where Walter had gone. She said after Barbara died, he got as far away as he could. If there's a pattern in all these stories, I think it's that none of us has gotten very far.
Train? '53 when he
Goodbye,
died.
everyone. I can't believe I've been down here for 30 years. On that first day, after the shaking started, I didn't think I'd survive a week. But after a few days, I settled into a routine. That's what kept me sane. Having a schedule, living for today. I always expected to be dead tomorrow. But if you wait long enough, you get used to anything. Even a monster on the other side of the door starts to feel normal. Almost friendly. And then one day, everything just stopped. Whatever that thing was, it was gone. Maybe it got tired of waiting. Or maybe I just got tired of being afraid. It's been a week now, the longest in 30 years. I'm done waiting. I have to leave while I still can. I know it's out there somewhere. Whatever killed Barbara and Molly and Calvin. Maybe this is all a mistake. But I need to stop living the same day, even if it kills me. Whatever's out there, I want you to know I'm ready for it. I'm going to appreciate all of it, especially the food. I don't mind if I only have a year left, or a month, or a single week. I'd be happy with one new day. can already imagine the sun on my face.
Walter died when I was 6. I can't believe my mom never told me he was down here.
Life is very often treated as a narrative. We think that things will continue on the same as they always had, or even get better in the future.
I'm sure my mom was trying to protect me.
It's easy to settle into a routine, as we've just seen. But eventually, everything returns to a baseline point. Fear turns into apathy, and then discontentment. It's called the hedonic treadmill. If you're happy with one way of living, you'll eventually adjust to that as the new normal and want more. And it took Walter a very long time to do so, but he did. Another function of stories is to, like I said, organize our lives into a cohesive narrative. And well, sometimes things don't have the happy ending that we wish they did.
Maybe she was afraid I'd end up like Walter. But if she never told me about an uncle under the house, I can only imagine what else she was hiding. I don't want to make the same mistakes she made.
That story also introduced an interesting point about the Finch family. They believe that one single thing is responsible for everything. Walter believed that the thing that killed Barbara was the thing that killed Calvin and the thing that killed Molly.
Trying to bury something that's still alive.
But
Now that there's only one of us left, or maybe 2, I thought it was time I heard the stories for myself and found out what happened to everyone else. But now I'm worried the stories themselves might be the problem. Maybe we believed so much in a family curse, we made it real.
the family curse is how they interconnect those deaths. Because it's easier to have a singular villain that perhaps can be overcome or fought than it is just to admit that sometimes the world doesn't make sense. That sometimes families are struck over and over by tragedy, and there's no reason for it. Trying to imagine
I don't know
that
if I should even be writing this.
is dreadful.
Maybe it'd be better if all this just died with me. But I thought you should know about your family. And the history you're a part of.
get our first inklings here as well of who exactly we're talking to as we write this story.
Though to be honest, I feel as lost as you probably do right now. I think the people in these stories believed them, for what that's worth. And when you look at the house, that history of imagination and stubbornness and madness, any of it seems possible. I think we've been surrounded by death for so long, we've just gotten used to it. What kind of family finishes building a cemetery before starting the house?
And when you get used to death, it helps to give it a face. Or at least a name.
It's embarrassing for me to admit this, but
it's easy to call it a curse. Friendlier, perhaps.
the pet cemetery made me more uncomfortable than the human one. 3 of the gerbils were mine, and 2 had been my fault. Sven built the house, but it was Edie who designed the cemetery. I'm sure Odin's monument had been Edie's idea. My mom was always trying to move on, but for Edie, the past never went away.
A more explicit explanation of why the rooms have been sealed.
She could see it poking out of the water at low tide. Edie said she dreamed about the old house every night. Edie's side was always easier for me to understand. But the older I get, the more I can see where my mom was coming from. Her dad had been pretty strict, but it wasn't enough to save her brothers. She was just trying to do better.
The flip side of putting a name to all of this misfortune and making it something that can be fought and overcome is that it must feel awful when you can't fight it or overcome it. Milton's gravestone doesn't appear to have a death date.
She lost 2 of her brothers, just like I did. I get why she tried so hard to protect us. There's so many things I wish I could ask my mom now. Part of me thinks this is what she wanted all along. For me to come back someday and find everything out for myself. But looking back on it now, if she told me there was going to be so much climbing, I never would have come when I was 22 weeks pregnant.
Ah. This was hinted at earlier, but perhaps a little more explicit now.
I never met Grandpa Sam, but I think he and my mom had a lot in common. They were both pretty intense. Sam spent his life shooting photos, but Mom said he got nervous being in front of the camera. I guess we're all afraid of something.
I'll explore back there in a moment.
Instead of hiding from death, Sam seemed to go out of his way to meet it.
Another way of coping with the curse, perhaps. Okay, airline ticket.
Dawn, I promise, you'll never forget this weekend.
Yes, sir.
These memories are gonna last perfect.
Whoops.
It's gonna rain the whole weekend, isn't it? Please just take the damn picture.
Hey, language.
I will never forget this weekend, Dad.
That's the spirit. Okay, got it.
Odin Finch has a
I'm gonna take some
national
pictures,
park
okay?
named after
Just
him.
be careful. That camera's older than you are.
You're right, Dad. It's starting to clear up. Still freezing, though.
Definitely should not have drunk all that coffee.
Hey!
That's a keeper.
I'm just saying, I'm not always gonna be here, Dawn. You'll need to remember this stuff, if you want to survive.
I'll be fine, Dad.
You know who else thought he was gonna be fine?
Some guy who died.
Dawn, I'm being serious.
I know, Dad. You're always serious. Doesn't being out here make you want to chill out?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't been out here in 20 years. Last time I was with my brother Calvin. Man, that was a great trip. Your grandpa Sven taught us how to fish, how to build a fire.
You'll have to forgive my photo composition. It's
We
been
found an old
a
logging
while.
trail. There were deer everywhere. I bet if I could remember where that trail was, we'd spot a...
Dad!
Good eyes, Dawn. Before you take the shot, let me get a picture of you.
Dad, I...
Just breathe. Turn. Let me get behind you.
Do I have to do this?
Dawn, you don't have to do anything. But if you want to survive, you'll need to be strong. Great shot, Dawn! I'm proud of you, Dawn. Always remember that, okay?
Dad!
It's twitching. I think
That's
it's
totally
so...
normal, Don. Just focus on the camera. Try not to think about...
Dad! Of all these stories, that's the one I wish most that my mom had told me.
Which is worse to imagine? A horrible family curse that's been persecuting your family for years, or that a parent you admire died in a freak accident that you had no way of knowing would happen, no way of preventing, no way of signposting. Like I said, it's easier to cope with a solid narrative structure than to think about, well, the existential crisis that is how random life can be.
After Sam died, my mom and Edie got really close. They'd both lost a lot.
This one might be a little bit difficult. I understand if some of my few viewers need to tap out.
Dear Kay, do you remember the way Gregory used to laugh when he thought he was alone? Like something funny was happening, but only he could see it. I think he saw things the rest of us don't.
Gregory, it's time to... Hold on, sweetie. Hello? Sam, I told you I don't want to talk right now.
I wonder what he saw. What his world was like. He reminded me so much of Calvin. Lost in his imagination. Whatever it was, he saw. It sure made him happy. I know how silly it sounds. you happy. But I could feel him slipping away.
Sorry about that, Gregory.
I know you did everything you could. Maybe if I hadn't called that night.
Damn it. Hold on, I don't want Gregory to hear this.
I wish he could have told us about the world he saw. There's so much I don't understand about Gregory, about everything. But I know what happened wasn't your fault. I'm sure he's happy. And he'd want you to be happy too. Good luck, Kay. Love, Sam.
Scarier than meaningless random events are the things that we may think are our fault. I know I'd find it easier to blame a curse.
I can't imagine my mom ever writing poetry, and yet...
A poem for Gus, who always said the wedding was a bad idea. Our father never hit us kids, at least not very hard, before the day my brother said with teenage disregard that he'd be dead before he'd see a wedding in our yard. My father made him come, of course, but Gus stood far apart, just flew his kite and bottled up the storm inside his heart. I tried to talk him out of it, but though he'd never met her, we don't need a stepmom were the words that
I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride.
When the time for photos came, Dad ordered him to come here. But Gus declined and as a sign held up his middle finger. The wind picked up and panicked geese appeared and quickly went. But all the humans did that day was go inside the tent. The rain came down in buckets then, but no one seemed afraid that nature might destroy the tent our dad had crudely made. The thunder sounded much too close and full of angry power. But all my father said to this was, "Make the music louder." I wish that I could truly say I thought about you on that day. Out there on the beach alone, just you, the wind, the sea, and foam. But I didn't, until we found you.
There were chairs in the trees on the beach earlier, if you recall.
She never talked about him, but Mom told me once if I was a boy, they were going to name me Gus.
Duties, Greg, be a baby.
My mom moved up to the loft after her brothers died.
This is where I'd
At the
be
time,
stuck.
it was as far away as she could get.
I can't climb rocks at all, even the fake plasticky rock walls.
She spent a summer building houses in Calcutta, where she met my dad, Sanjay. My mom moved to India a week after graduation and got a job teaching English. Louis was born a year later. When my dad died, I don't think Mom knew where else to go. I'm sure Edie was happy to have her back and to see kids in the house again. The house had to get a little bigger, but Edie was used to that. And for a while, things were good, almost normal. But it didn't last. The beginning of the end was Milton's 10th birthday, when Edie gave him a castle.
Once
After
again,
Milton disappeared,
no end
the only
date.
thing he left behind was a room full of paintings.
I will say this apparently does interconnect with another game by the same studio. I haven't played that game and probably won't be for a while, as I'm fairly certain it's console exclusive.
I think Edie was happy to finally have another painter in the family. Milton Finch in The Magic Paintbrush. I was 4 when Milton disappeared.
And that's all we get of Milton. No story because there was no closure, and no closure because there was no story. And if his disappearance and him having this room was the beginning of the end, well, whatever that means, perhaps without the story to
Mom spent months
process
searching
it,
for my brother. Then she sealed the doors.
the grief is just too much.
found in the house. Mom didn't want it getting out.
And as we saw from outside, there are still hundreds of missing posters. So without that closure, well, maybe it's a little harder to accept that he might just be gone.
Mom definitely blamed Edie, but I think Louis blamed himself. After he graduated, he just spent more and more time in his room, until Mom got him a job at the cannery. Everyone always told me to stay out of Louis's room, except Louis.
22 when he died, apparently.
Louis's room smelled very, very familiar. That part of him lived on.
Now Louis is a chap I can understand. Greater Seattle Institute of Psychology to Dawn Finch. That's worrying.
Dear Mrs. Finch, as Louis's psychiatrist, I can understand your desire for an explanation. As I see it, the trouble began in January, shortly after we convinced your son to seek treatment for substance abuse. Newly sober, I believe Louis first noticed the monotony of his daily life. He kept working at the cannery, but he withdrew part of himself. In our sessions, I saw the same behavior. His mind began to wander. I asked him to describe it. He said he started small, imagining a labyrinth.
Noticeably, the mouse motion for the fish beheading
He'd feel his way about.
Wholly mindless, which I suppose makes sense.
Then something moved. Bats. And toads. And things that have not names. He knew it was all in his head. But he took it very seriously. I had hoped he'd find himself. But he found something more. I worried about him then. Daydreaming at the cannery. I spoke with his boss. But he said Louis had become a model employee. Methodical, tireless, focused. Like a whole new Louis. So I let him go on. I even encouraged him. It seemed very promising at first. He told me he'd made a new friend. On the edge of a city he named Louis Topia. He built the city up slowly, brick by brick. Then he made musicians. And songs for them to play. He talked about starting a band. and he was always humming something. Every day his imagination grew stronger. He no longer spoke at the cannery, but his chopping was as reliable as ever. Then one day it struck him that all the cheering crowds, even the stones under his feet, were all in his imagination, so he could do whatever he wished. He held an election for mayor, and he won. They begged him to stay, but his mind was already wandering. It became a game for him. He'd conquer a city, then immediately push on. New Louisville. St. Louis.
Ha ha, very funny.
He started drifting away from our reality. Minneapolis.
That one's just
Until one
bad.
day he forgot to go home from the cannery. Even as his mother pleaded with him, part of Louis kept sailing on. In Louisburg, he heard rumors of a beautiful prince. The prince was on his own quest for sinister serpents. He followed the sound of his silver harp. His chase led him to a golden palace east of the sun and west of the moon. Even then, his logic remained sound. He knew the world was all in his imagination. But he was so proud of having created it. In his own eyes, he'd become something greater than a king. For someone who'd never known success in the real world, I think it was overwhelming. And then it struck him that the real Louis was not the one chopping salmon, but the one climbing the steps of a golden palace. My imagination is as real as my body, he told me. It was hard to argue with him. He began to forget the world we know. I think it pained him to remember Lewis, the cannery worker. He began to despise the man with a royal contempt. I still thought I could save him. Even after he said he was being crowned king over all the lands of wonder. The palace would be packed with his companions. Including the wise Calico who'd insisted on advising him. His prince waited, holding his crown. There was only one thing left to do. Bend down his head. And the rest I think you know. Mrs. Finch, your son was a kind man who will be missed by all of us who knew him.
My brother was really cool. I wish you could have met him.
And perhaps this is the most stark portrayal that perhaps stories aren't always a good thing. Maybe Lewis's stories were the reason that he died. And in fact, it seems quite obvious that they were. And what if that extends to the story of the family curse? What if, by believing in some external force causing all of their problems, they're taking away their own responsibility? That perhaps by insisting that death is inescapable, death becomes a foregone conclusion.
Lewis and I spent a lot of time playing games together, but he was surprisingly bad at them. He died a lot. He was so proud of being Indian. I think for him, it was a way to be something other than just a Finch.
As a method to cope, they're certainly not infallible.
On the way back from Lewis's funeral, my mom told me to start packing. She waited until the day before we left to tell Edie. I'm not sure if she wanted to make it easier or harder. I wish we'd stayed. But I understand why we left. My mom ended up leaving everything behind. What happened that night had been coming for a long time. Maybe it should have come sooner. But it had to end one way or another. All that's left now was to tell you about that last night.
And so we come not to a book, but a pen. The only story left, it would seem, are the stories
That
of
whole
the
last
Ediths.
day, Edie just watched us pack and didn't say a word. Until supper, when she raised her glass and said,
"To our final night together, and all our final nights apart."
Grandma, you know what I said about alcohol. Some of your medications are very
Edith,
specific.
I left a present for you in the hallway. Why don't you go open it? The grown-ups have to argue now.
I'm sorry, you're right. We're all leaving tomorrow. Let's just enjoy our last...
I'm not leaving.
Edith, you're excused.
The power had been shut off that morning, but Edie always had plenty of candles. When my mom sealed the library, I don't think she knew about the other entrance. Or that Edie had a key to it.
They say that all the Finches are buried somewhere in the library.
That thing you're afraid of isn't going to end when you leave the house. Edith has a right to know these stories.
My children are dead because of your stories. I think it's best if Edith and I leave tonight. We'll have the nursing home send a van for you in the morning, okay?
Dear Edith, there's so many stories I wish I could tell you, but there's only time for one. This is about what happened on the night you were born. That night, the tide went way, way out. It was the first and last time I ever saw the old house aground. There'd been an earthquake out in the middle of the ocean. They called it the lowest tide in 1,000 years. God, it smelled awful. You know, I've seen that house every day of my life. But I never thought I'd go back to it. When the fog rolled in, I lost my way. I got turned around. I started seeing things. Things I'd forgotten had ever existed. But when I saw them, they felt like old friends. That night, a lot of things came back to me. Or maybe I came back to them. Things I can't explain, but that I need you to try and...
Edith, what are you doing in here?
It's mine.
Edith!
Mom, you're gonna rip it! Let go! I kicked and screamed, but Mom dragged me to the car. I never saw Great-Grandma Edie again. The next morning, the van came to pick her up, but she was already gone. After that, we moved around a lot. We both tried to make the best of it. A few years went by. My mom didn't like to talk about it. But she started getting sick a lot. The rest happened pretty quickly. She got better for a while, and then she didn't. And then I was alone. The last Finch left alive. Until I found out about you. I'm still not sure what to tell you about all this. If we lived forever, maybe we'd have time to understand things. But as it is, I think the best we can do is try to open our eyes. And appreciate how strange and brief all of this is. This journal was supposed to be for you. But now I hope you'll never see it. I just want to meet you. And tell you all these stories myself. But I guess if you're reading this now, things didn't work out that way. This is where your story begins. I'm sorry I won't be there to see it. It's a lot to ask, but I don't want you to be sad that I'm gone. I want you to be amazed that any of us ever had a chance to be here at all. Good luck.
The title of this game poses a question in itself. What remains of Edith Finch? And in the end, what remains of any of the Finches are their stories. What is remembered are the tales we tell about those who have gone to those who are still here. When the van went to pick up Edith Sr., she was gone, and the only thing that remained were the stories in the house. And when Edith the Younger passed away, the only thing that remained of her were her stories. I don't claim to have any special insight to the meaning behind this game, to the meaning behind any of it, really. But I think I can pretty definitively say what remains of Edith Finch. I'd like to thank you all for listening to me pontificate about story and narrative for the last couple hours if you've made it this far. And I'll see you all next time.